Well, hello. We're starting out the new year with a best-selling author. He wrote the book, The Thin Blue Lie, L-I-E, and I'm very excited to have him on because he spent 5 years in the FBI. He was perfect for the whistleblower role that he undertook because he had that background in the FBI, and he went to another agency and he was able to see how FBI agents were operating in that other agency. Very excited to have you with us today, Gregory Dillon. Heard a lot of good things about you. I hear your book is a big success. I assume they're going to make a movie and you're going to tell us who's going to play you. But welcome on this first week in 2023.
Thank you very much, Shane. I'm honored to be on the show.
Thank you. Let's start a little bit, Greg, about where you were born and where you were raised.
Sure. Born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut. Spent the first 4 years of my life there. Attended a parochial high school in West Haven and then the nearby University of New Haven. They were one of the few schools at the time that had a 4-year accredited criminal justice program. So I took advantage of that. And upon graduation, I applied for and was accepted by a local police department, the Branford Police Department. And Jane, as you know, you need 3 years of work experience in your field before you can apply to the FBI. So as soon as I was coming up on my 3rd year, I began the application process. And around my 5th year at the police department, I was offered an invitation to attend the FBI Academy as a special agent.
And you obviously are very humble, Greg, because you didn't make a comment about the fact you graduated first in your class from the police academy.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. So I'm sure the FBI was delighted to have you.
Well, we were both delighted. I always thought that was my dream job, and I was very excited about the opportunity to be with that organization. Yeah.
And you had a well-rounded career there in the 5 years you did spend there, because you were criminal, correct, during the entire time on the violent squad?
Yeah,
squad?
I think the first assignment was criminal reactive, and then when I was transferred to the Washington field office, it was considered the violent crime squad. Yeah.
And how did you find the FBI and the Washington field office? Did you enjoy your experience there?
I did. The Alexandria field office was a little overwhelming because we were a small office and it was a very busy office. So for a first office assignment, it could feel a bit overwhelming. I think we responded to an average of a bank robbery a day, and there were only 2 of us, me and another first office agent, that were doing bank robberies. So I felt like all we ever did was,
wow,
dictate 302s while you were going to your next bank robbery. Left very little time to investigate. Most of our time was spent documenting and then responding to the next crisis. And I was on the SWAT team at the same time. So with the occasional call out and the training, it could be overwhelming at times, I thought. Yeah.
Yes, but obviously you did well. They didn't put on a first office agent onto the bank robbery squad without obviously getting recommendations that you were a great law enforcement.
Well, I made it quite clear that was my aspiration, was to be involved in the criminal work. I had no interest in foreign counterintelligence,
right,
or white collar, or the applicant squad, which is where I started. So fortunately, I was able to gravitate into that arena. Yes.
So you spent 5 exciting years in the FBI. You learned how it operated. You learned what agents were responsible for. One critical thing is never embarrass the bureau. You knew
that was early on, yes.
Right at the academy.
Sure.
Early on. And you also learned about fidelity, bravery, and integrity. Integrity, of course, meaning you don't lie.
Your word is your bond. Yes.
Your word is your bond, and that is critically important. But you decided to leave. Tell us the reason why you left the FBI.
So I was in this unique position where I was told when I was first hired that I could probably expect to get back either to Connecticut or at least the New England area within 5 to 7 years, which I felt was acceptable to me. I was a single guy. All my family and friends were in Connecticut, so my desire was to return. And I was counting on that. And the Alexandria office, relatively small, around 1986 or 7, was actually absorbed by the Washington field office, a top 12 office, so meaning a large office, one of the largest in the country. I think it's the second, only behind New York. I believe it was the biggest office.
Yes.
So while it was exciting to work in an office of that size, what it did was it stole my opportunity to be reassigned to my second office after 3 to 4 years, which I was counting on. So I found myself stuck, for lack of a better word, in the Washington field office. And then I was told it would take another 10 or 15 years before I could expect to get back to New England, which was sort of a deal breaker for me. I was familiar with the positions within the Chief State Attorney's Office, knowing they were somewhat comparable to the FBI, no uniforms, complete autonomy with investigations across the entire state police powers without having to work for the state police. So I applied, and fortunately I was hired probably within a month or two. And then in January of 1990, I started my third law enforcement career with the Chief State Attorney's Office as an inspector.
Yes, and I'd like to clear up a little bit about the transfer policy, because a lot of people aren't familiar with it. But during that period of time, it's interesting, your law enforcement career mirrors mine. I came in in 78, and so it was really interesting to read about you. But at that time, you did 2 years in your first office, and then you got to go to, you could pick, it used to be you'd list 1 to 10, but with you, I'm sure it was 1 to 12.
Yes.
And then you would be sent to the big office. Well, because that small office got incorporated in the big office, they just simply said to you, you're in your big office, so you have to wait for your office of preference, which may take 10 or 12 years.
Yes.
They had no do-overs for you, or you didn't get any good doobies for coming in under an old policy.
Right. And Jane, if we have the time for this very quick story.
Sure.
As soon as I was hired, within a month or two, they offered me the opportunity. Well, they didn't really offer me. They recommended that I attend a computer forensic course at the National Academy, at the FBI Academy at Quantico. I was fine with that because I spent so much time down there, the SWAT training, that I met a lot of people there. So I went there for the week, and I ran into a group of new agents that had not yet graduated on the elevator. And I asked them, have you gotten your transfer orders? Yes. And they were like, oh, yes, we have. I said, how did you do? Now, when I had gone through only 5 years earlier, almost to the month, none of us got our first choice, our second choice, or our third choice.
Oh.
Yeah, nobody. And so I asked them, I said, how did you do? And they were like, oh, great. I was like, really? And they said, oh, yeah. Everyone but 3 people got their first choice. 3 people had to get their second choice.
Oh, new agents?
I'm sorry?
The new agents got to pick?
Yeah, class of 1990.
Wow.
And so I heard it and I was like, I think they're pranking me. I can't believe that. So my buddy was a unit chief down there, and I stopped by his office and I said, Al, is this true what I just heard? And he was like, yeah. He says they're getting all their choices right out of the graduating class. He says, because so many people resigned over the transfer policy that they could not keep up with the recruiting.
That is amazing. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, it was an eye opener for me. Yeah.
I know when I got orders for New York, they needed 1,000 agents, and they cut orders for 1,100 because
they know 100 will resign.
100 would resign. So that's amazing. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing that with us. But so it's very clear you were a great agent. You were on the SWAT team, which is kind of a very specialized area where they walk tall and proud. And so you were doing great. Nobody pushed you out. You were a great agent, but you wanted to go home. And
Yes,
it was the job, I believe, was inspector in the chief state's attorney's office, right?
yes.
And what did that entail? And I'm sure they must have loved to have gotten a former FBI agent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that is the reason why I was hired, because most of the other inspectors were, mostly male at the time, and almost all of them had either retired or were coming up on retirement at their police department. You had to have 7 years of law enforcement experience, 3 as a dedicated investigator. So the competition is pretty fierce. They usually get a lot of applicants from the bigger city police departments that have been detectives for 10, 12, 15 years. So I was very fortunate and very happy to get hired for that position at my age. Most of the gentlemen were in their 40s or 50s or even 60s. I think I was going in at age 37, maybe at that point. Or 35 even, I think. Yeah. So I was the youngest inspector in the office at the time. Sure.
And I'm sure they thought they were very lucky to get you with that kind of background, even at a young age.
They made me
Not
feel
that
very
young.
welcome. Yes.
Yes, yes. So tell us what you were working on there.
So the office is almost like a small FBI office. They have a number of dedicated units. One was Medicaid fraud, one was white collar crime, one was organized crime. So it's sort of similar to a degree to a typical FBI office. And I started off on white collar crime because that's where the opening was. Wasn't my forte, but I learned on the fly. And then I ended up on a grand jury, ironically for police corruption, which took almost a full year. And as that was winding down, the chief state's attorney decided he wanted to create his own fugitive squad because of the high number of people that were not showing up in court after making bond.
Sure.
So this was his brainchild, and he posted the position. And of course, I spotted that, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity for me. And I'm thinking it's going to be this competitive process. And I learned, and it's kind of funny in hindsight. They had 2 openings, and I was the first and second candidate because no one else applied for the position. So that should have been my first tip off that maybe it wasn't going to be what I thought it was going to be. So
but you were perfect. You were perfect.
And I welcomed the opportunity because
yes, you were
was
perfect.
not my thing.
Yeah, you were perfect for the role. I mean, the SWAT training, reactive crime, they couldn't have asked for a better. And I want to ask you about that. When you mentioned growing up, did I get the sense you grew up in a Catholic household?
Yes. Yeah. I went to a Catholic a Catholic grade school and then a Catholic high school.
See, I'm good, aren't I? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice picking up on that.
Did you get a sense that I always like to ask whistleblowers this, that you were at the right time, at the right place? It was almost like it was meant to be.
Well, the pieces fell into place nicely for me. So, I mean, even though my disappointment of not being able to stay with the FBI and get back to Connecticut, it still worked out because I ended up with a nice job with the state in the state I wanted to be in. Yes.
And you were kind of heading the Joint Task Force, correct?
Well, so what happened?
It was kind of your baby. Yeah.
Well, yes, I was the first one hired. Then because no one else applied, they opened it up to the outside. And I was fortunate that a Hartford homicide detective that I worked with on the grand jury investigation, he applied and was hired. He was coming up on retirement. So the 2 of us started doing this work. And within a short amount of time, apparently someone from the FBI Fugitive Task Force that was out of the New Haven office learned of our existence and offered us the opportunity to work with them. So once all the memos went back and forth and it was approved by the chief state's attorney, Steve and I found ourselves working on this joint FBI Fugitive Task Force.
And that is not unusual. There are joint task force all across the nation.
Oh,
And
yes, I think there were
y-
56 at the time, I believe,
Right.
just for fugitives.
Right. So you're on this obviously flight path, and your career is going great guns. You've hooked up with the FBI. I'm sure you've got a lot of work. Tell us what happened next.
Well, we did. We had a lot of work, and we had so much work, and we were so successful, both Steve and I with our caseload and the office in general, that the chief state's attorney wanted to bring in additional personnel to keep up with the referrals we were getting. We were getting referrals not only from all the bail bondsmen who had clients that had absconded. Also, we were getting referrals from the parole, state parole, and state probation. So there was plenty of work to go around, and so they ended up hiring an additional 4 inspectors. So now there were 6 of us assigned to the task force, and because of the number of inspectors, they had to create a supervisor's position in my office, and I applied, and I was made the supervisor.
Which tells us you were very successful, obviously had highly complimentary performance reports. And then the FBI, who comes in to join you for this task force, how many agents did you have?
You know, it varied. There was a coordinator, and then there was one agent that was assigned there since I had gotten there. And then 2 more were brought in. They were first office agents. So it was usually about 4 agents. There were now up to 6 inspectors. We had a New Haven detective, eventually got a Hartford detective, a Bridgeport detective, and I think we had 3 Connecticut state troopers also assigned there. So there were about, a dozen to 15 of us at any one time on the task force. Yeah.
And you were the supervisor.
Well, see, I was the supervisor for the inspectors.
Right.
And the coordinator made it clear that he was in charge, but I was responsible for my own men. Yes.
Yes. Good.
And I understood that. That makes perfect sense.
Yes, but they knew you were an ex-agent. So
Oh, yes.
There's a certain amount of respect you're going to get right off the bat, hopefully. So that's what makes this story even more shocking. So tell us about your whistleblower journey, because things are going great, right?
Everything was going very, very well.
Yeah.
What I noticed was the FBI coordinator was always trying to get us to submit draft warrants for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, federal warrants. And I understood the rationale behind this. This is how they justify their existence on a fugitive task force by obtaining UFAP, right? UFAP warrants.
Right.
So their numbers reflect activity. And it almost got a little bit overbearing, because every case where the state would approve extradition nationwide was now the focus was, we'll get the UFAP warrant. Well, oftentimes there's no indication that they've left the state, and they could very well still be in state. But the focus now became, let's prove that they might have left the state, and let's get that UFAP warrant. Okay, I get it. They were now receiving, because of the amount of work that we were bringing in, they were getting quality step increases.
Yes.
Remember, financial incentive awards,
Yes.
which you remember, and it's because of the fact that they were bringing in more UFAPs than ever.
Right. The statistics,
yes.
are piling up, which shows that they're doing great work.
It helps their budget, and helps
bet.
bring in additional manpower.
That's right.
I get all those things.
Because they take that to Congress and say, here's our statistics, look how great we are. So the more pumped up they are, there's just a huge history of this. It's certainly true in Indian country. They had those stats so pumped up. It was remarkable. But that's how they got more people and more money.
Well, and that's how they got their QSIs, and they got their financial incentive checks,
Yes.
and letters from the director, and
Right.
So I understood how the game was being played, and I was okay with it. But at some point, the U.S. Attorney's Office refused a couple of UFAP warrants, and it's because they were trying to create something that wasn't there. They wanted to say, well, because we haven't found him in Connecticut and he has family that lives in, say, New York, we believe he's in New York. And they would come
Sure.
back to the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, you need something a little better than that.
Yeah.
What happened was, unfortunately, they decided to add fictitious information to the warrants to embellish the probable cause that the person had left the state of Connecticut.
Right.
And the bigger problem was they were doing it using either my name or the name of two of the other inspectors, and attributing this false information directly back to us. So we would prepare a draft warrant. We would give it to one of the newer agents. The coordinator apparently would review it, decided it was insufficient probable cause. Someone added information, attributed it to the inspectors, had it signed, and we never saw the warrant again. So all we were told was, oh, the UFAP warrant was approved and it's filed. And everything was fine until one day I had to get information off of one of the warrants. And when I found the one that had been filed, I realized there was information on there that I was unfamiliar with, and it was attributed directly to me.
Okay, so much for integrity.
Yes.
That's a big no-no in any law enforcement. That is manufacturing evidence.
Right. And Jane, you know as well as I do, nobody wants to be the one to throw the penalty flag
No,
in the game.
no, but the FBI has a history of doing this. We certainly know about Tombstone Informants, where they're made up totally, but there's not actual people involved with Tombstone Informants where you
Correct.
make it up out of thin air. They're utilizing your good name
Yes.
to kick this over the goalpost.
Yes.
That's not a good idea.
No. No. So
And
the first time it
Isn't
happened.
it also perjury? Because it's
Well, it
going
is
before a
because you're
judge.
bringing the warrant to a federal magistrate or a federal
Right.
judge, and you're under oath and you're swearing to the
Right.
veracity of it. And you have to know, or you should suspect that that information has been added.
Unforgivable. So
Yeah.
so you found out.
Well, I discovered one, and
Okay.
I was, well, Jane, you know this, you're at a crossroads, right?
Yep.
You're either, there's no taking the
Yep.
middle ground. You're either gonna go hard left or hard right, but there's
Right.
no down the middle.
Right.
I tried to go down the middle initially, and I'm thinking, well, maybe there is some sort of a miscommunication here, some
Right.
error. And now I've got to be very, very aware of what's going on.
I saw that. You were not reactionary at all. You
No.
thought this could just be a miscommunication.
I was hoping that this was going to be an
Misunderstanding.
honest mistake.
Right. I'll let this one go because it could just be a misunderstanding.
Right.
Very big of you. Very
Yeah.
big of
Well,
you.
so what actually happened, Jane, and I don't know how much detail you want on this, but when I found the first one and I saw that I had a conversation with an officer in New York State, which I obviously knew I did not. I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and thinking maybe one of them had made that phone call.
Right.
So when I had the opportunity, I actually made a phone call to that police department, and I asked to be connected to the officer. And when they said, hang on, I'll connect you to the evidence room, I was like, okay, you know what? There actually is an officer there with that name. And I
Yeah.
hung up and I said, okay,
Okay.
I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
But I didn't forget it. And then I saw another warrant come back to me that I knew was falsified.
Okay. Now we
So-
have 2 times.
Right. So now I go back and I actually call the officer from the first warrant. And when I speak to him, he has no idea what I'm speaking about.
Oh,
Doesn't know the fugitive, doesn't know the address,
Oh.
and even says the address that you just gave me is not even in the town that I patrol in.
oh,
So
no.
I was like, okay. And I said, is there any other officer with your same last name on your department? He says, no. I said, thank you. Okay. So now that's 2.
That's
So
bad.
I go
Yeah.
to my colleagues and I said, if you can find any of your old UFAPs, I said, that have not been removed and gone to the main office, I said, review them. Okay. So Steve, the original hire, comes back and says, yeah, he goes, I have one. He says that has definitely been falsified. The other inspector
Okay.
comes back and says, I have three.
Oh,
He says, and I don't recognize the information in there. And they're attributed to me. I went back and found a third. So now I had three. Steve Freddo had three. Steve Kumnick had one. That brought it to seven. And as I like to say, Jane, in police work, as you well know, right? One time can be a mistake. Two times could be a coincidence. Anything at three times or more is a pattern. And
that's right.
we had a pattern of falsified affidavits.
And somebody had to work on it, Greg, because they came up with a false address. They came up with a name of somebody in a different city. So somebody was working hard to get these details as close to, passing as they could, except they were lying about their
Yes.
statements
Yeah.
and others.
Yeah, they
This
were
is
packing together
terrible.
information
Yeah.
that but it completely misrepresented the facts. They were just
Yeah.
picking and choosing and then linking them and then attributing them to me or to one of the other inspectors. Now, so there's two things, Jane. In police work, if you want to be stupid and reckless and put in false information, put your own name on it. Don't
Correct.
attribute it to one of your colleagues behind their back without their knowledge. And now you've just jackpotted them, because if something bad happens,
Right.
they're going to be the one being asked to explain their information.
Correct. So let me ask you, since you were in the Bureau, did you talk to the overall head from the FBI, asking him why this was happening?
No.
Because
Because I knew what was going on at this point. I mean,
right.
As
But
much as
did
I was
they
trying to
think you
give
were
someone,
stupid? Did they think you were stupid?
no, what they thought was we would never see those warrants again, because as soon as they were filed, they were returned to the
They
main
were
office where
returned.
we did not have access to them. But there were always a handful that never made it over to the main office.
Sure.
So once we were able to look at those, we realized what was going on.
The jig was up.
Yes, and ironically,
Mhm.
only years after the fact did we discover that we had, between the three of us, we had actually prepared, I think it was 56 or 61 UFAP warrants. We were only able to review maybe a dozen. So how many other falsified warrants
Right.
were out there? I have no idea. When OPR finally got around to interviewing us, I recommended that they retrieve any warrants that
Yes.
our names on them and let us look at them. And we were never shown any additional warrants.
Of course not. And you
No.
never will.
No.
But now these were warrants, the UFAP, which the Bureau is involved with because it crosses state lines. Were all of the agents there doing it, or just that overall supervisory person?
Well, so here's
Did you ever find out?
well, they all denied it.
Oh,
And
of course.
OPR never polygraphed anyone.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ironically, OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility, offered polygraph examinations to me and my two colleagues.
Of course. Yeah.
And we agreed.
Oh,
And we're still waiting on those polygraph examinations to take
oh,
place.
you passed. Yeah, you passed. I could tell. If you didn't get the results, you passed.
No, they never even gave us the opportunity to take the polygraph.
Oh, they didn't give you the opportunity.
No, because at that point they realized they're going to pass this polygraph.
Yeah.
And if they didn't if they didn't put the false information in, who did?
Who did? Now,
agents.
my understanding is one of the agents got promoted.
He did during the OPR investigation.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was the common denominator, because three different agents signed the warrants, but they all went through his desk. So at the end of the OPR investigation, and I hate to even call it an investigation because it doesn't even do the word justice.
Yes.
But after they spent some time looking at this. One of the newer agents received an oral reprimand, one
Right.
received verbal reprimand, one
Right.
received counseling, and the coordinator received a 2-week suspension and 6 months probation, which he immediately appealed, and they reversed it,
Oh,
and he kept his promotion.
yes. I shake my head. Obviously, they're still running the bureau like that, and it makes me very sad because that was very typical back when I blew the whistle. Very typical, and I'm sorry to hear that still continues. But you were the hero here because you said something. Tell
Correct.
us
But Jane, you know
after
as well as I do, your career path,
gone.
exactly, the trajectory has just been killed and you
Right.
never advance.
Right. But now tell us what you did because it was all correct. You did the right thing. You went to your boss. Tell us about this. And then you
So
went further.
I
Yeah.
went through my chain of command. I went to
Yes,
the
you
chief
did.
inspector, showed him the documentary proof. I showed him the original drafts that we had prepared for the UFAPs. And then I showed him the UFAPs that had actually been filed in court. And one could clearly see, so plainly obvious, Jane, that back then, if you remember, you used electronic typewriters and manual typewriters. We didn't have the printers and all that we have today. The added paragraphs would sometimes be in a completely different font from the typewriter.
Wow.
And it was that obvious as it had been added on as an afterthought. And so I showed him our proof, and he knew me at this point for several years. He knew the other 2 inspectors for several years. And we all said the same exact thing. Yeah, this is false information attributed
Yes.
to us.
Yes.
He brought it to the chief state's attorney's attention. And after several weeks, no one got back to me. It made for a very, very, as you can imagine, a very uncomfortable environment when
Yes.
we're trying to work with FBI agents that we do not trust.
Right.
Finally,
Did they know you'd blown the whistle?
Not yet.
Greg? Not
Not
yet.
yet.
Okay.
So
But had
finally,
retaliation started yet, Greg?
not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
But finally, the chief state's attorney, only because now I sent him a memo directly to him saying that this has now gone on for several weeks without any action.
Right.
And it's too important to just
Let it
link.
die. Yeah.
So he called me in and he says, I cannot believe, he feigned outrage. I mean, maybe legitimately he was outraged. I'm not sure. But anyway, he seemed quite upset, and he says, we're going to remove you from the task force, which was fine with me because the trust factor was gone at this point. And he says, we'll bring you back to the office. You'll continue to do fugitive work, and I will let the SAC handle this. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So we had to leave the premises, and that was fine. And we continued doing fugitive work, and we were very effective. We were, despite not having the benefit of a UFAP warrant, we still sent out leads across the country. And because we had extradition approved by the state, police departments, sheriff's departments, we're still picking up our fugitives based off of our information we were providing. We're quite successful. And I'd like to brag a little bit here.
Please do.
We were making several arrests a week at least. And for the whole time that we worked, we were never once sued. We never once shot anyone. We never injured anyone. We never had a car accident, a car chase, and no one was ever injured either as an arrestee or as a police officer, which I thought was a remarkable streak of good luck for the type of work that we were doing.
It is remarkable.
Violent felons that were going back to court or prison.
It is remarkable. And you accomplished it by telling the truth. You didn't have to lie.
Correct. So despite that tremendous record, the chief state's attorney decided that all of a sudden we had run out of funding and we were going to no longer be doing fugitive work. And we were all sent out to various courthouses across the state and ordered verbally and in writing to never discuss our allegations with anyone going forward.
Yes, this is the start.
Yes. So it was the gag order, and then it was being disbanded. And then even though I was no longer on probation as a supervisor, I found myself no longer a supervisor. All of my All of my personal records reflected nothing but praise. I had either superior or exceptional reviews on all of my ratings. And all of a sudden I was no longer a supervisor in the office.
And did they start downgrading? This is another little trick on whistleblowers. They start downgrading your performance reports? Started tinkering with them, your evaluations?
It never went to a below average, but it certainly never was where it had been previously.
Yeah.
And now my work was working back in white collar crime, working for a new supervisor junior to me.
Yes, this is all very typical. And I assume they changed your work assignment and put you in some small room somewhere.
That also happened a little bit later on.
Yes, yep. They're following the map.
Sure. Yeah.
And
After the first lawsuit where I was successful, I had found myself, and I was very happy. I was now the supervisor of the gang and continuing criminal activity bureau. Perfect. Very similar work, firearms, narcotics, gangs, my comfort zone. And instead of disbanding us in total, it was death by 1,000 cuts. So where I walked into a unit that had 4 prosecutors, 6 inspectors, a paralegal, and 2 secretaries, I all of a sudden realized every couple of months we would lose someone for one reason or another. And Jane, it got to the point where I had a bureau of 12 people. Eventually, it came down to me, 1 inspector, 1 prosecutor, and a part-time secretary, covering the entire state of Connecticut.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
And I was sharing an office with my subordinate that had been a former coffee break room.
It's amazing. So they were trying to get you to quit, obviously. Sure. Force him out. But now let's talk about this lawsuit, because you had gone through the proper channels.
Yes.
But at some point you realized, after they gagged you, that that was wrong.
Absolutely.
And you decided
no,
to
I mean,
do
I thought at
something.
that point, what else can you do to me, right?
Right.
You've taken away the work that you put me into. I'm no longer a supervisor,
Right.
and I'm being punished for doing nothing but trying to preserve the reputation of my office.
Correct. For being a truth teller.
Correct. What I did not realize, Jane, at the time, and no one else did, I knew that the chief state attorney was infatuated with the FBI. What I did not realize was he was also trying to get hired by Janet Reno in the Department of Justice at the same time.
There you go.
And he knew that, number 1, the FBI would have to do his background investigation. And number 2, he would probably need the endorsement of the SAC and the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Definitely. One hand washes the other. So you had 2 people at this point that are sticking it to you, and they put a gag order on you. And so what did you do?
I went and spoke to a private attorney and ran my issues past her. And she deliberated and said she wasn't quite sure if this was a trial-worthy case. But then once I was transferred to a distant location, and then I was transferred back, and then I was no longer a supervisor, she said, we certainly have enough there to justify a federal lawsuit for violation of your First Amendment right.
Correct. Your First Amendment right, your right to speak out.
Because we could not defend ourselves.
No.
When the newspapers were reporting that we had been removed because we were incompetent or we weren't carrying our weight, and that it was a personality conflict and it was miscommunication with the warrants, we couldn't respond or defend ourselves. And that was finally the last straw.
Because they had gagged you.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you did something about it. Tell us what you did.
I filed a federal lawsuit with my attorney, Karen Lee Torrey. The other 2 inspectors, unfortunately, did not wish to join in the lawsuit. and I understand why. At the time, I was married, but with no children. Both of
Right.
them had younger children. They both
That's
were
right.
planning on sending them to college. They could not risk losing their job. Not that I really could, but I was in a different environment, and I understood
Yes.
their trepidation in getting involved in my lawsuit. So I filed a
Yes.
lawsuit as a solo complainant.
And how incredibly brave of you to do that, because it turned out you were a winner.
Yes. Yeah.
You went to court.
Yep.
And tell us about some of these incredible witnesses you brought to the stand. I know Dr. Lee was one.
So what happened was we had a jury trial.
Yes.
And because of the unique circumstances, the jury only had to decide 3 issues. Was the fugitive squad disbanded because of retaliation? Was I no longer a supervisor because of retaliation? And was I transferred to a remote location for retaliation? And then the judge, after the jury's verdict, was going to decide whether the gag order was unconstitutional or not.
Yes.
I think it was too complex of a legal issue to allow a jury to decide.
Right.
So she bifurcated the trial so that they heard those 3 issues. They returned a verdict on those 3 issues. They issued their award or awards because there was compensatory, punitive, inconstitutional.
Yes.
And following that, then she held a series of hearings about the constitutionality of the media policy as it was applied.
You won on all 4 of those issues.
Yes. Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You won on all 4 of those issues. And let me tell you something, we don't have to talk about what you were awarded, but if you had stayed with the FBI, you'd have been capped at 300,000.
I saw that. I did a little research and I saw that. Yes.
So it worked out because
It
they'd
did.
have capped you, and you had no cap there. And the jury
No.
came back and obviously fully believed you had been taken advantage of. There were issues here that deserved to be remunerated. So that says a lot
It was a
about your
harsh
case.
rebuke to the FBI and to the chief state's attorney. They both got
Yes.
spanked pretty well in the jury's verdict. Yes.
And there was a lot of money here at stake. So you did good. Now, you weren't satisfied with that, though. You continued, correct? Because you also went after, I believe it was the state's attorney.
Well, so I didn't continue. They continued.
Yes, they
Yes.
wanted to.
So after the jury award, then we had testimony from Dr. Henry Lee, because the chief state's attorney wanted his credibility to sort of support his position.
So did the state call Dr. Lee?
They did.
Because I noticed the judge said his testimony just contributed to the length of the trial and was totally not even relevant.
It wasn't, because he had no involvement whatsoever
Right.
with the facts of the
was the
case.
that's the best they could come up with?
He wanted the star power. Dr.
Didn't
Lee
work.
did not want to be there. He made it clear he didn't want to be there,
Oh,
but he was subpoenaed to be there.
dragged him in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And ironically, as soon as he was on the witness stand and they asked him if he was familiar with the case, he said yes. He said, I actually had Greg Dillon as one of my first students at the University of New Haven. He goes, he goes, not only was he a good student, he goes, but he's been a very good police officer. So
Bingo.
I think that surprised everyone that he would acknowledge me publicly within 5 minutes of getting on the witness stand.
Meant to be. I was not
Yes.
aware the prosecution called him. That explains a lot. Because
Yes.
they got kicked by the judge for that stunt.
Yes.
Now we have another star power name here.
Yes.
we
We were allowed
have-
to bring in our own witness after they were done with their witnesses.
You brought in Mr. Serpico,
Frank Serpico.
loved by many people. And he came to your trial, which I know Mr. Serpico. And let me tell you, a lot of people love him. He is not easy to get to jump on the bandwagon for anybody.
Yes.
So
He's very
obviously-
selective in
He's very
in
selective.
his support.
So he believed, obviously, that you had a case that was well worth him coming to testify.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a validation that is really special.
Yeah, I was very proud to be able to meet him and get his support.
Yes. That is very special. So he testified as to the fact of what issues in this trial.
Well, so here's the twist. He was scheduled to testify, and we were in negotiation to settle the award because they were in the process of appealing it to the Second Circuit Court because of the size of the award.
Yes.
They also dreaded, I suspect, Frank Serpico showing up because there were so many
Yes.
television camera crews and news stations that were just eager to interview him.
Oh, yes.
So the night before his testimony, they made us a very generous settlement offer, which we accepted. So the following day, he was not allowed to testify on the stand, but he stood on the courthouse steps and read a statement to the press, which was very supportive of me and the other inspectors in this. Yes.
Excellent. Would you refer to that as the Serpico Effect?
Yeah, I guess that'd be appropriate. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's wonderful. And like you said, and as I know, he's very selective. He just does not show up for anybody. There's no two ways about it. So
Yeah.
good for you. Good
Yes.
for you. I'm delighted. I saw the picture. That's another bonus that you have.
Yes.
Is
Yeah.
the two of you together.
Yes.
Very
Yeah.
special.
Yeah. I had a hardcover edition of of the first printing of his book when I was in college, and I had kept it just because I
Mhm.
loved the book, you know.
Yes.
And when I brought him back to New York and I dropped him off, I brought the book out and I said, you know, Frank, would you do me a favor and sign it for me? And he was like, wow, I haven't seen an edition this old, he goes, in years. I was like,
That's
yeah, I said,
great.
this is the first printing. So I
That's
have that
great.
as a keepsake.
That's great. That's a
Yeah.
wonderful story.
Yeah.
So tell us, Greg, where you're at now. I know your book is a bestseller. Tell us where you're at now after your successful court judgments, monetary awards, people coming out of the woodwork to support you. Tell us where you're at.
Well, so ironically, after that first lawsuit, when I went back to work, I had a honeymoon period until the chief state's attorney left office. His successor came in, and this is when I was on that gang unit and all of a sudden found my I don't want to say manpower, but our personnel dwindling by the month. And at the end, finally, when there was only a handful of us left out of the original 12, the new chief state's attorney, who had testified in the first trial, decided we didn't really need a gang unit anymore. And he then told me I was in charge of the elder abuse unit.
Oh yeah, that's a biggie.
Right. And when I left his office, he stopped me before I could leave and said, and the evidence room.
Oh, joy. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So as I left his office, I walked back to my office. I called my attorney and I said, I think we are looking at a second lawsuit at this point. And we filed a second lawsuit. This was 8 years after the first one. He fortunately or unfortunately was not reappointed. He was not a very popular chief state's attorney. When he was not reappointed, my lawsuit sort of lost some of its traction, I guess, because he was no longer my boss. So the state settled with me out of court on that one.
Exactly. 2 wins.
Yes.
2 suits, 2 wins.
Yeah.
And so tell us, where are you at now?
Well,
you have fire in your heart, don't you? You have fire in your heart. So what are you doing now?
Well, I'm retired.
Okay.
I play pickleball and I go to the gym and I try to speak at some of the local libraries when they invite me. But that's pretty much it. I'm very comfortable relaxing. I'm just turned 66, so I feel like I deserve the rest. And I stay involved with different things. I sit on the board of directors of a nonprofit, and so between all these little things, I keep myself busy. You know, I still enjoy reading, and I'm not writing any other books, but I do enjoy reading stuff.
Oh, you're not. Too bad, because this one was great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Are you going to be involved, or are you involved now in any whistleblower issues? You know, we're trying to start this initiative for a national permanent whistleblower day.
I've been contacted, usually because of LinkedIn.
Sure.
A few people have reached out to me in private.
Yes.
And one person I sort of mentored through the process,
Good.
giving her some recommendations and suggestions as to, the next step and, the kind of what to do, what not to do. And then a couple other people have just been, one phone call, kind of run something by me. I give them my, I'm not an attorney. I don't try to pretend to be one, but I give them the benefit of my experience.
Yes.
And I try to show them some support and encouragement. And so that's probably been it. So very informally have I been involved with other whistleblowers. Yes, I did sign on to that letter for Stephen Friend, which you may be familiar with.
I interviewed him. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So Terry Churchy spearheaded this. I have a lot of respect for Terry. Never worked for him, but I know people that know him well. And I was flattered to be one of the 30 that signed that letter. And I still try to stay in some sort of contact with Terry about that issue.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'll tell you, not only are you a whistleblower, but you have the heart of a lion and you are a warrior.
Thank you so
And
much. Well, Jane, it takes one to know one because you went through the same thing.
I did. Your story is so reflective of mine. It's a little scary. I'm sure they have some guidebook back there because it really is very close.
It does follow the same pattern.
Yes, it does. But you are a truth teller and you are a hero and a warrior. And I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart because I know what you've gone through and it's not easy. It is not easy. So you are a warrior.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much. I
Greg.
appreciate that.
Much luck and success to you. I just think you're something special.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. God bless
You bet.